The drop that changed the entire practice. One football hit the ground, and suddenly the biggest quarterback debate in Cleveland looked completely different. The throw was there. The timing was there. The opportunity was there. Shedeur Sanders delivered the ball exactly where the play demanded, giving Jerry Jeudy a clean chance to finish what should have been one of the easiest completions of the session. Instead, the football slipped away, and what looked like a routine rep instantly became one of the most frustrating moments of Browns practice. Because this wasn't really about one drop pass. It was about what that drop could mean inside an offense searching for answers. Every quarterback competing for the Cleveland Browns needs his receivers to finish plays. A quarterback can identify the coverage, anticipate the opening, release the football on time, and place it accurately. But if the catch never happens, the final result tells an incomplete story. That's what made this moment so important for Sanders. The box score could record an incompletion. The coaching staff, however, could see exactly how the play developed. And Jerry Jeudy is not just another receiver fighting for attention. He is supposed to be one of the dependable weapons in this offense. The kind of veteran target a quarterback should trust when the window opens. That's why every mistake receives more scrutiny. One drop can be dismissed. Multiple missed opportunities begin creating uncomfortable questions about concentration, consistency, and whether Cleveland's quarterbacks are getting enough help from the players around them. There is no reason to turn those mistakes into something they are not. Nothing in the material establishes that Jeudy is intentionally hurting Sanders or deliberately refusing to make plays. What the practice footage does create is a legitimate football question. How should Cleveland evaluate its quarterbacks when some well-executed throws are not being completed? For Sanders, that distinction could become crucial. His challenge is already enormous. Every repetition matters in a quarterback competition where experience, contracts, expectations, and public attention are colliding. He cannot control whether a receiver completes every catch. He can control his reads, anticipation, decision-making, accuracy, and command of the offense. And on the throw that started this conversation, Sanders appeared to do his part, but that was only the beginning. Because once observers looked beyond this single drop, another uncomfortable detail emerged. This wasn't necessarily an isolated moment. Other missed opportunities were beginning to attract attention. And suddenly the discussion shifted from one mistake to something potentially more concerning, a pattern. Before we get into that, where are you watching from? If you believe Sanders should be judged primarily by the quality of his decisions and throws, comment 1. If you believe the final results should matter most regardless of receiver mistakes, comment 2, and subscribe to the channel for more NFL news, quarterback battles, player stories, and analysis. When one mistake becomes a pattern, one drop pass can disappear by the next practice. 2 can make people curious. 3 can change the entire conversation. That was the problem. Cleveland suddenly had to confront the concern around Jerry Jeudy was no longer tied to one frustrating moment. According to the camp accounts described in the original material, there had been multiple instances during this stretch where catchable footballs intended for Jeudy ended up on the ground. That distinction matters because these were not desperate throws into impossible windows. They were described as on time, on target, and positioned where an NFL receiver should reasonably expect to finish the play. And that changes the evaluation. Nobody needs to invent a conspiracy. There is no evidence that Jeudy is intentionally hurting anyone's chances. The issue is much simpler and much more important. Execution. If the quarterback handles the protection, processes the defense correctly, anticipates the route, and delivers the football accurately, the receiver has to finish. That's where the pressure begins. Jeudy has real talent. His route running, separation ability, and understanding of leverage are exactly why expectations around him are high. But talent only matters if the play ends with possession. When the football repeatedly hits the ground after everything before the catch point has been executed correctly, coaches have to identify where the failure is happening. And if other receivers are finishing similar opportunities, the consequences can arrive quickly. Targets follow. Trust. If Isaiah Bond continues making difficult catches, if Casey Washington keeps settling into open windows, and if other receivers consistently reward accurate throws, quarterbacks naturally begin looking toward those players more often. Chemistry doesn't wait for reputation. It develops through repetition and successful execution. That is what makes Jeudy's situation dangerous. He is not competing against an empty depth chart. He is competing against teammates who understand that every missed opportunity creates an opening for someone else. The Browns do not need perfection from Jeudy in August. They need a response. They need to see whether the next catchable pass sticks, whether his concentration sharpens, whether he turns a rough stretch into a temporary chapter, instead of allowing it to become the story of his camp. Because while everyone focused on the drops, something else was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. The quarterback delivering many of those throws was quietly building one of the most interesting cases in the entire Cleveland competition. Shedeur Sanders is doing his job. The easiest way to misread a quarterback competition is to look only at completions. A pass can be perfectly read, perfectly timed, and perfectly placed and still appear as an incompletion on the stat sheet. That is why Shedeur Sanders' evaluation requires more context. In the Day 13 numbers presented in the source material, Sanders finished 13 of 21 with 1 touchdown. But one of the most important plays of the session was a throw that never became a completion because the receiver failed to secure it. The quarterback cannot control the final catch. He can only control everything leading up to it. And across this stretch of camp, Sanders' strongest argument has been his willingness to throw with anticipation. That means delivering the football before a receiver is completely open. It requires understanding the route concept, reading defensive leverage, trusting the timing, and releasing the ball toward a space that may not look open yet. When done correctly, the football arrives as the receiver finishes his break. That style can create explosive plays. It can also make a young quarterback look aggressive in ways that traditional numbers sometimes fail to capture. Sanders has repeatedly been described as producing moments that stand out. The ball placement, the timing, the throws into windows before they fully develop, the connection with receivers who seem increasingly comfortable operating within his rhythm. That does not mean every rep has been flawless. It shouldn't. Young quarterbacks make mistakes. Training camp exists to expose those mistakes before games count. What matters is whether the underlying process looks repeatable. Can he identify the right matchup? Can he move through his progression? Can he deliver on time? Can he create when the first option disappears? Those are the questions Cleveland's coaches are actually studying. And Sanders has also shown another trait that matters in a competition. He creates memorable moments. Coaches remember the third down conversion that keeps a drive alive. They remember the anticipation throw that beats a coverage before the defender understands what happened. They remember the quarterback who suddenly raises the intensity of a flat practice. Those plays don't guarantee a starting job, but they influence one. And that brings the Browns to the uncomfortable comparison at the center of the entire camp, because the other quarterback in this race has been operating very differently. Sanders versus Watson, the real quarterback battle. On paper, Deshaun Watson had a clean day. The source material listed him at 12 of 17 with no touchdowns and no interceptions. That is efficient football. No reckless decisions. No catastrophic mistakes. No giveaways. A veteran quarterback taking what the defense provides and keeping the offense moving. There is genuine value in that. But the Browns are not simply choosing between good statistics and bad statistics. They are choosing between two different styles. Watson's case is built around experience, control, and efficiency. Sanders' case is built around anticipation, playmaking, and the ability to create moments that change the temperature of practice. That contrast has defined the competition. Some days, Watson looks more polished. Some days, Sanders looks more dynamic. But when a quarterback battle stays close long enough, evaluators eventually begin looking beyond completion percentage. They study command, presence, body language, how receivers respond inside the huddle, whether teammates appear to trust what they are seeing. Those details matter because the starting quarterback does more than throw passes. He becomes the emotional center of the offense. The Browns also have to ask what style gives them the better chance when protection breaks down or when the game requires something outside structure. Safe football can prevent losses. Explosive football can create wins. Neither approach is automatically superior. The question is what Cleveland needs. If the roster is built around defense, field position, and avoiding mistakes, the veteran approach has obvious appeal. But if the Browns believe they need a quarterback capable of creating chunk plays and elevating the offense when everything becomes difficult, Sanders becomes much harder to ignore. And there is another layer, rep distribution. Sanders received more attempts in the Day 13 practice described in the source. That does not prove the coaches have chosen him. But opportunities matter. Because teams do not have unlimited evaluation time. Every first-team rep represents attention. Every additional series provides more evidence. The deeper camp gets, the more valuable those opportunities become. And when one quarterback consistently receives more meaningful work, people naturally begin asking whether the coaching staff is already leaning in one direction. That question became even louder when the rest of Cleveland's quarterback room started fading into the background. The reps are starting to tell the story. Quarterback competitions are rarely decided by press conferences. They are often decided by practice schedules, who gets the first-team reps, who receives the 2-minute drill, who works with the most important receivers, who gets the extra series when coaches want one more look. Those decisions reveal priorities. The source material describes Sanders receiving 21 attempts compared with Watson's 17 during the Day 13 evaluation. Dillon Gabriel went 4 of 5 inches limited action. While another quarterback remained outside the meaningful first-team rotation, that distribution may be one of the most revealing parts of the competition. Gabriel's situation is straightforward. He is handling the opportunities he receives without creating unnecessary problems, keeping himself relevant as depth and insurance, but the top of the depth chart appears increasingly concentrated. Sanders and Watson are receiving the meaningful evaluation. That matters because every training camp eventually reaches the point where development gives way to decision-making. Coaches stop asking, "What can everyone do?" and start asking, "Who gives us the best chance to win?" Once that happens, reps become precious. The quarterback receiving the larger evaluation window gets more opportunities to demonstrate command, correct mistakes, build chemistry, and produce defining moments. Sanders has used those opportunities aggressively. Watson has generally used his efficiently. Again, two different cases, but the longer the competition continues, the less room there is for neutral outcome. A coach eventually has to decide which traits he values more, the explosive anticipation throw or the safe completion, the younger quarterback creating something memorable or the veteran keeping the offense on schedule. That decision also affects every other player. Receivers begin adjusting to cadence and ball placement. Offensive linemen learn how long a quarterback holds the football. Running backs develop timing around checks and protection calls. At some point, the Browns need one identity, and that is why outside commentary suddenly became so important. Because when Rich Eisen entered the discussion, the quarterback coffee stopped feeling like a local training camp argument. It became a national NFL story about performance, money, and trust. Rich Eisen makes the debate bigger than Cleveland. Once Rich Eisen weighed in, the conversation changed. The source material frames Eisen's argument around one basic idea. If the people inside the Browns building believe Sanders has genuinely outperformed Watson, the organization cannot simply ignore that perception. Because one player carries a larger financial commitment, that argument strikes directly at one of the most uncomfortable realities in professional sports. Money matters, but money does not complete passes. Contracts influence decisions because teams have to manage salary cap consequences, organizational investments, and long-term planning. Yet locker rooms operate according to a different currency: performance. Players know who is earning opportunities. They see every practice. They watch film together. They know who understands the protection, who stays late, who creates explosive plays, and who commands the huddle without needing to announce it. If those players begin believing one quarterback is clearly better, the coaching staff faces enormous pressure to make a decision that matches what the locker room sees. Otherwise, trust can erode. The source also introduces the Russell Wilson comparison as an example of a franchise eventually choosing football direction despite major financial consequences. The point is not that the situations are identical. The point is that contracts do not make players untouchable forever. That is what made Eisen's comments so powerful. The question was no longer simply, who had the better practice? It became, what message does Cleveland send if performance loses to obligation? That affects culture. If players believe roster decisions are predetermined regardless of what happens on the field, competition loses. Meaning, why fight for a job if the result has already been purchased? But if coaches truly reward performance, every player in the building understands that opportunity remains available. That creates accountability, and it raises the stakes for both quarterbacks. Sanders cannot simply rely on momentum or media excitement. Watson cannot rely on reputation. Both have to earn the next decision. And while the quarterback debate consumed the headlines, something much more encouraging was developing behind it. The Browns may be discovering an unexpected group of receivers capable of changing the entire offense, the receivers nobody is talking about. While Jerry Jeudy's drops drew attention, Isaiah Bond was building something far more valuable: trust. The connection between Bond and Sanders kept appearing throughout the source material, not as one isolated highlight, but as a relationship developing through repetition, timing, anticipation, communication, the kind of chemistry that begins to look natural before anyone officially calls it chemistry. One particular catch captured it. Sanders delivered a ball that forced Bond to fully extend, and Bond finished the play. That matters because difficult catches accelerate trust. A quarterback remembers the receiver who saves an imperfect throw. A receiver remembers the quarterback willing to give him an opportunity even when the window is tight. Those memories influence future decisions. Then there is Casey Washington. His value comes from a different skill set. The source describes him finding soft spots in zone coverage, understanding spacing, settling into the correct windows, and producing yardage after the catch. That is not simply athleticism. That is football intelligence. Quarterbacks love receivers who make the field easier to understand. When a receiver consistently appears where the quarterback expects, the offense becomes faster. The quarterback can release earlier. The defense has less time to react. And suddenly Cleveland may have options. That changes everything about the Jeudy conversation. If Jeudy struggles but nobody behind him is producing, the Browns simply have a receiver problem. But if other players are emerging, the situation becomes competition. Targets can move. Personnel packages can change. The offense can adapt. That is why receiver depth matters so much in this quarterback battle. Sanders and Watson are not only being evaluated individually, coaches are evaluating how the entire offense responds to each one. Which quarterback creates the cleanest chemistry with Bond? Who finds Washington at the right depth? Which quarterback encourages receivers to attack the football aggressively? Those connections become part of the larger decision, and perhaps the strongest evidence came late in practice. Because when the Browns simulated a 2-minute situation, both quarterbacks produced similar results, but the way they reached those results revealed two completely different personalities. The 2-minute drill reveals the difference. Statistically, the 2-minute drill looked almost identical. Both quarterbacks began from their own territory. Both moved the offense into scoring range. Both produced a field goal opportunity. If someone only looked at the final result, the competition appeared even, but football is rarely that simple. The source material emphasizes that Sanders created one of the defining moments of the day during his drive. On a third-down situation, he pushed the football toward Isaiah Bond. The pass was not perfectly clean, but Bond extended and made the catch, keeping the drive alive and setting up the score. That play mattered because of the environment around it. Practice had reportedly been flat. The energy was low. It was late in the session, exactly when players are most likely to go through the motion. Sanders still produced a moment. That is the intangible coaches struggle to quantify. Some quarterbacks manage pressure. Others seem to become more alive inside it. Sanders' strongest argument throughout camp has been that when the situation demands something memorable, he often finds a way to create it. Watson's drive was different, controlled, efficient, professional. He moved the football without forcing the situation. That has real value. A veteran quarterback who manages the clock, protects possession, and consistently moves the offense toward points can win football games. But the difference between managed and electric is exactly what Cleveland has to evaluate. There is no easy answer. If the Browns want stability above everything else, Watson's approach fits. If they want a quarterback capable of turning broken moments into explosive opportunities, Sanders offers a different ceiling. And now practice can only tell them so much. The next phase requires live football, an unfamiliar pass rush, different coverages, a defense that does not know the quarterback's tendencies from weeks of practice. That is where anticipation gets tested. That is where holding the football too long becomes dangerous. And that is where the Browns' internal decisions suddenly became even more intriguing. Because Todd Monken reportedly already knew who would get the first opportunity, he just wasn't ready to tell the public. Todd Monken already knows. By the time Todd Monken spoke about the upcoming game, the evaluation had apparently reached a new stage. According to the source material, Monken indicated that he already knew which quarterback would start against Chicago. The decision existed internally before it became public, and his plan was to tell the players directly before anyone else heard it. That detail matters. Not because it reveals the starter. The source does not establish that. What it reveals is process. Monken wanted the quarterbacks to hear the decision privately and directly. That communicates respect. A quarterback competition can easily become toxic when information leaks through reporters before players understand their roles. By handling the conversation face-to-face, Monken keeps control of the locker room and gives both men time to process what comes next. And the preseason structure makes the evaluation even more interesting. The plan described in the source gives each quarterback significant live game exposure. One gets the earlier opportunity, The other receives extended work afterward. And the order can change in the following game. That means the battle is not over just because one player starts first. Now the competition moves from controlled practice to genuine football conditions. Chicago will bring different pressure looks, different disguises, different timing, different physicality. Sanders will have to prove that his anticipation and chemistry survive against a defense that has not practiced against him every day. Watson will have to prove that his efficiency remains intact when the pocket becomes unpredictable and he no longer knows exactly how pressure is likely to arrive. The offensive line will matter enormously. The injuries and absences discussed in the source create additional variables around protection. That means coaches cannot simply count completions. They have to evaluate how each quarterback reacts when structure disappears. Does Sanders continue processing quickly? Does Watson release the football before pressure closes? Can either quarterback turn third down into a winning down? Those are the real questions, and they are bigger than one starting assignment, because whichever quarterback eventually wins this competition will determine the identity of the Browns offense. The receivers are developing, the chemistry is changing, the locker room is watching, the national media is watching, and the coaching staff has finally reached the point where practice evidence must collide with live football. Everything that happened before this was preparation. The next game is where the argument begins to produce an answer. When the football finally speaks, every quarterback competition reaches the moment when practice reports, contracts, and media debates stop mattering. For Cleveland, that moment is here. Shedeur Sanders has built his case with anticipation, confidence, and playmaking. When the offense needs energy, Deshaun Watson has answered with experience, efficiency, and controlled football. Jerry Jeudy's drops have added another layer. While Isaiah Bond and Casey Washington have strengthened their chemistry with the quarterbacks, now the Browns must decide what matters most strategically. Cleveland needs more than the quarterback with the better practice stat line. It needs the player who can process pressure, protect the football, attack tight windows, and keep the offense alive when the play breaks down. Sanders must prove his anticipation survives against an unfamiliar defense. Watson must prove his efficiency can become aggression when needed. The receiver room faces the same standard. Jeudy's talent is obvious, but missed opportunities cannot continue forever. If Bond and Washington keep finishing plays, targets will naturally move toward the players earning trust. That is not punishment. That is competition. The biggest lesson is that reputation, money, and outside noise should never outweigh performance. A locker room needs to believe opportunities are earned. Competition also does not have to become personal. Two quarterbacks can fight for one job without disrespecting each other. And a struggling receiver can respond without becoming a villain. Saturday will not decide a career, but it will reveal something. Practice cannot. Who stays composed when the pocket collapses and there is no second chance. If you believe Shedeur Sanders has earned the opportunity, come on. If you believe Deshaun Watson gives Cleveland the better path, come on, dude. Tell us where you're watching from. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more NFL news and analysis.